Hold your noses because we're entering map 5, the back door. You know, after playing through this, I feel I was too harsh on DC's Brownwater, a pretty good sewer map. Probably my biggest issue with this map is just how much of it is caked in almost pitch darkness. I get that sewers aren't supposed to be completely lit up, but suspension of disbelief here. It feels like the entire map is formulaic too, with corridors and underwater corridors. Escalating a large room with lava in the center seems to be the one interesting part, and even that feels like it's more on the sparse side, not especially thought out. Sure, it may technically be an original map, but it has nothing other maps haven't done better, and I think I'd actually prefer to play the retread maps over this. It's time to pick the wrong house, fool, in map 2 where it all began. Yep, it's Hollywood Holocaust, played backwards with a wintry theme, because of course it is. I honestly had trouble deciding which was worse, because this has things like cars and a truck that make it stand out more. On the other hand, it's like half the map doesn't even acknowledge the events that happened the first time around. The arcade still has the explosives with no visible hole until you shoot them, and the earthquake damage happens too, as if they just copy-pasted these areas. Despite being based on such an iconic map, that doesn't mean this retread is anything to write home about. I've just been in this place before with map 1, Deja Vu. Let's not beat around the bush, this is mostly the red light district with a winter's skin and played backwards. Probably the most substantial map design choice is the demolished building in the middle of being replaced, but even that's pretty minor, and Duke 64 made far more substantial additions to this map. Yeah, the snowman enemies and Christmas-skinned enemies are cute, but the map leaves something to be desired, and more extras would have helped. The destroyed room of a building to get a keycard just isn't enough to keep it from feeling like an obvious repeat map. I'm probably repeating myself, but hey, that just means I have something in common with this map. It's probably one of the weakest starting maps in a first-person shooter. It's time to sing a song for the Misfits at Map 3, Land of Forgotten Toys. To the map's credit, it's a fine 3 keycards in any order affair, which I enjoyed during the few times it's in Doom. Funnily enough, the reference to Doom Z1M1 looks like it's had far more effort than the previous 2 maps referencing Duke 3D maps. There's also a reference to a Mario, which is nice, even if the practically mandatory fall damage pipes were annoying. Other than that, though, the map doesn't have too much else going for it, and I should mention I'm not a fan of the Elven Militia jumping around either. Still, at least it has the honor of being the first actually original map, so I have to give it credit for that. Prepare your sleighs because it's map 6, Christmas Village. This is another map that steers more towards alright than necessarily good or bad, which still puts it ahead of most. It's a shame the theme wasn't taken more advantage of in this expansion pack, cozy cabins with Christmas lights contrasting nicely with a dark, cold winter night. Well, at least it has a naughty building, interestingly modifying one of the previous sprites to say the least. The runway for his sled was a nice touch, although it's kind of weird that it's at his personal home instead of the corporate office, presumably his workshop. Still, it is one of the more solid maps with good use of space and pretty nice thematic areas. Let's file out a job application in map 4, Santa's Corporate HQ. This map is actually alright, even if a bit straight line forward at times. There's a nice cozy cabin aesthetic contrasted against the more harsh wintry outdoors and a touch of office elements. There's a bit of weirdness with having to avoid touching the sides because harmful force fields, but not too big of a deal. Admittedly, one part of the map tripped me up a bit with a crack in some bars when I thought I'd have to find a way around them because Doom mindset. Well, one nice thing is early on there's a Christmas tree full of medkits if those militia elves shred you a bit too much. The Santa office with his presumably nice list was a good touch too. Basically, the map's not great, but competition is lacking so far. Get your jollies on for map 7, Here Comes Santa Claus. You know, it's kind of funny how this is a reverse situation with no rest for the living. That had exceptional maps and a very lackluster boss. This has relatively weaker maps, but a surprisingly engaging boss. While the map itself is only just alright, at least there's enough content to make it feel like a complete map. Santa himself is just straight up a deathmatch bot, making it genuinely tough by single-player standards. It's kind of funny that Duke is said to have saved Santa though, and depending on how this fight goes, he could have just turned him into Jibs. It's not some clone or something either, it's the Santa Claus brainwashed. Anyway, while this boss doesn't make the whole expansion great or anything, I will admit it was a real highlight. It's time to wrap up this nuclear winter in a neat little package. I'm going to say, this has to be the weakest of the Duke 3D expansion packs for the most part. 2 maps are just barely tweaked clones of existing Duke 3D maps, and even the original maps never really approach original Duke 3D or Duke It Out in DC levels of quality. The only thing I can say is unique in a surprisingly good way is the Santa Claus boss fight himself, but that's about it. A couple of the maps are alright, but I feel the Christmas theme could have been explored so much better than it was. You could have had full-on Christmas villages outside of Santa and the Elves' houses, or a Christmas-themed park with lights everywhere. Ultimately, it has some good stuff in it, but it's mostly lackluster, both for Duke and for Christmas.